Good evening, everybody, and thank you, Mary. Truly appreciate it. As Mary mentioned, my name is Chad Stuemke. I grew up in Detroit, Michigan, spent most of my life there. I now live and reside in Traverse City, Michigan, and I'm really excited to be here tonight. And the name of my talk is The Emergence of the Gates, Urban Portals and Gateways in Our Cities. And what I want to discuss tonight is the fact that over the last several decades, art and architecture has emerged in the hearts of some of our major cities that contains an amazing amount of gateway, Stargate, ancient Egyptian, and astrological symbolism. These monuments and these parks, they've been hidden in plain sight, and they're just waiting to be recognized and utilized by those of us here that can become aware of them. Now, these urban portals, as I like to refer to them, many times have emerged on pieces of sacred landscapes. Landscapes that have been imbued with energies sometimes hundreds, sometimes thousands of years. And this is much akin to ancient times. Stone monuments and the Giza pyramids, what have you, would be built on pieces of sacred landscape. Well, this is perceivably what's taking place with some of these parks and monuments. But now the sacred landscape in North America is many times located in the hearts of some of our major cities. Now, not only are these being built on sacred landscapes, but many times they're also being orientated and correlated to the stars. And sometimes this is surely done intentionally and consciously by the artists and architects, but in some cases what I've recognized, this may have been done unconsciously. Some of these parks even divinely arranged. And surely some may consider this a coincidence, maybe even a synchronicity, that these incredible monuments containing this gateway and stargate symbolism, they're showing up on pieces of sacred landscape, sometimes being orientated and correlated to the stars in the heavens. But what I propose and want to show today is when we have coincidence after coincidence and synchronicity after synchronicity, at some point these may become messages for us. And by us, I mean those of us who can, one, recognize the symbolism and tune into the symbolism. I believe we'll be afforded the opportunity to actually utilize these monuments. And we'll talk a little bit how we can utilize these monuments as we go on today. Now, in regards to the symbol of the gateway, symbolically speaking, gateways can represent a sense of passing from one state to another, one world to another, even the known to the unknown. But the gates can also take on a psychological and dynamic quality that not only indicates a threshold, but invites us to cross that threshold. And that's what we're going to do today, is cross that threshold by uncovering and unveiling some of this gateway and stargate symbolism. Now, I mentioned we're looking for some stargate symbolism, so I want to clarify the kind of stargate we're actually looking at tonight. Now, initially, when most of us hear the word stargate, surely we're thinking of these ring-like objects we've seen in the science fiction movies and the science fiction depictions where you have this ring-like object and people, what have you, can go through this object and travel intergalactic space at less than the speed of light. Well, that's really cool. I mean, who out here don't want to be able to do that? But it's a little different than the kind of stargate and gateway symbolism we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about Stargate that has best been described by friend and colleague William Henry as a place on Earth that's a shamanic trance portal to other worlds, where energy ringing and pulsing from our star, other stars, and star systems is easily received and, I believe, transmitted. And that's what I believe many of these Stargate parks we're going to look at today are. They're parks located on sacred pieces of landscape where we can go down there and connect with cosmic and stellar energies. So we're going to start off today in my hometown of Detroit, Michigan. In the heart of downtown Detroit, it's not brand new, it's 30 years old now, but amazing plaza by the name of Hart Plaza. And there is Stargate and Gateway and ancient Egyptian symbolism everywhere down here, leading to I like to refer to it now as Stargate Detroit. And I just want to go over just a really brief history. I'm going to get a lot more into this tomorrow in my talk. But just briefly, this is Antoine Cadillac, and this is the founder of Detroit. In 1701, Antoine Cadillac was coming up the Detroit River, and he picked what he believed to be the perfect location for Detroit. He pulled his canoe ashore and he planted his flag. And it happened to be the precise area that Hart Plaza is now located. Now, when Cadillac was coming up the shoreline back in 1701, there used to be ancient stone monuments, ancient mounds, burial mounds, temple mounds. This was already considered hallowed ground to the local Native American Indians. Now, inside of some of these mounds, what's really amazing, there were thousands, upwards of 10,000 of these relics discovered. These are known as the Michigan relics. Very few people know about this. Reason being, archaeologists say they were a hoax. And I'm going to get into a lot of detail about these tomorrow. But one little thing I'd like to point out is the theology incorporated on them. It's not Native American. That was a main issue with the archaeologists. Obviously, these must be hoax. We'll get into this tomorrow a little bit in my talk. But the point I'm making is that this has always been a sacred landscape for hundreds, maybe thousands of years. So moving up the timeline a little bit to the year 1947. This is Eero Saarinen, architect from the Detroit area. Detroit was upgrading the riverfront, hired Eero Saarinen, and he felt that a civic center, the base of Woodward and Jefferson, just seemed right. Just seemed like it fit in. The same year, Eero Saarinen was imagining another monument, the Gateway Arch. Getting back to Detroit, 30 years later, another artist by the name of Osamu Noguchi comes to town and implements Eero Saarinen's plans, brings Hart Plaza into fruition. And wait till you see some of the symbolism Mr. Noguchi incorporated down here. Now the first thing I want to point out is the layout, the general layout of Hart Plaza. What Noguchi did is he orientated and correlated Hart Plaza to the Giza pyramids. And I'd like to point out the several monuments, the amphitheater. This is the Horus and Sun Fountain. This is actually a pyramid, aligned precisely with the Giza pyramids. In Giza, there's a causeway that leads to the Sphinx. Here in Hart Plaza, there's a causeway that leads from the Horus and Sun Fountain to a pylon. Looks like a large Egyptian-styled obelisk. So what we're going to do is I'm going to go through these several monuments and just look if we see any correlations, synchronicities, coincidence, where we can try and make a legitimate comparison. So we'll start off with the amphitheater, then we'll look at the Horus and Sun Fountain, the pyramid, then we'll take the causeway to the pylon. And what we know about amphitheaters, all amphitheaters, is that they are transmitters and receivers of frequency and vibration, tunes and tones. And as we go through these parks tonight, you'll see that these amphitheaters are instrumental in these Stargate parks. They're a place where you can go and soak up the vibrations. And here in Hart Plaza in particular, this whole bowl of an amphitheater is done in red granite. And of course, granite is filled with quartz crystal, the perfect transmitter and receiver of frequency and vibration, tunes and tones. Moving on to in the heart of Detroit, in the heart of Hart Plaza, is the Horus and Sun Fountain. This was also done by artist Osamu Noguchi, the same gentleman who did the general layout of the plaza. And according to Mr. Noguchi, the Horus and Sun Fountain here, in his own words, is symbolic of our relationship to outer space. And there's incredible symbolism surrounding this fountain. And you can see what he's saying, that our relationship to outer space at night, when the lights are flashing around this thing, kind of resembles a UFO. I can kind of see what he's saying. Now it's actually dedicated, like I mentioned, to Horus, and this is Horace Dodge, Dodge automobile pioneer. We're down here in Detroit, Michigan. Well, I think we can look at the name Horus as synchronistic. We're looking for Egyptian symbolism. But this is actually dedicated to Horus and Sun, as I mentioned. Well, it just so happens Horus named his son Horus Jr. And in Egyptian mythology, in some cases, there's a Horus the Elder and a Horus the Son. So I'm thinking in quite a literal sense, we can look at this fountain here as dedicated to Horus the Elder and Horus the Son. It just so happens, coincidentally, Horus the Elder here, he was born in Niles, Michigan, kind of like the Nile River. And we're just scratching the surface on the symbolism of that fountain. I'm going to get into a lot more detail about that in my talk tomorrow if anyone's interested. And to correlate the final pyramid in Giza, here in Hart Plaza, in the exact same position, we have a pyramid. Don't got to look too far for symbolism. It's an actual pyramid. There's signs pointing away. Of course, in ancient Egypt, pyramids were considered gateways to the stars. I think we can consider a gateway to the stars a Stargate. Now, leading from the Horus and Sun Fountain, the causeway leads to the pylon at the entrance to Hart Plaza. And we could assign all kinds of symbolism to this pylon here. It sits right at the entrance of Hart Plaza. I mean, surely it's a transmitter and receiver of sorts. But I like to give you the author's own words and the artist as much as I can. Rather than speculate, let's tell you what the artist says. And the artist says the pylon here, it was done by nature originally. You might call it wind. It relates to the atmosphere, to space flight, and all aspirations that we have today. So in Osamu Noguchi's own words, he's saying the pylon here is symbolic of space flight, all our aspirations. And its companion piece, the Horus and Sun Fountain, this is symbolic of our relationship to outer space. This is in the artist's own words down here. Has anybody heard this before? Now, Osamu Noguchi, did he build this plaza intentionally? Did he align it to the Giza Plateau intentionally, or maybe a little unconsciously? In regards to intentionally, before he came down here to Detroit, he was on a 2-year sojourn around the world, where he spent most of his time at the temples in India, but the majority at the Great Pyramids in Giza. He was really interested in the relationship the Egyptians had with their sacred sites as well as the heavens and the stars. And he comes back to Detroit, and he gets his very first opportunity to create a civic center on his own. And this is what he comes up with, Stargate Detroit. Now, as far as unconsciously, I'll get into that a little bit tomorrow with some of his previous artworks. I believe a lot of this was done unconsciously, almost as if some of the symbolism was downloaded through Noguchi into his blueprints. And I'll get into that a little more in detail tomorrow. But in short, I think Osamu Noguchi, he was in contact with cosmic consciousness. And he came down here to Hart Plaza, or came down to Detroit, and created Hart Plaza as, I believe, a cosmic temple. A place where we can all go and connect with these same stellar energies that Osamu Noguchi once connected with. All Hart Plaza, the part we looked at so far, was done in the mid-1970s, and we haven't even got to any of the gateway and Stargate symbolism yet. In 2001, Detroit held its tricentennial celebrations, its 300th birthday. I call this the emergence of the gates. This is when a lot of the gateway symbolism came into play down here in downtown Detroit. First gift Detroit received is this brand new park, Tricentennial Park. The names of the blueprint was the Gateway Vision. Then back at Hart Plaza, they received this brand new monument. The area that Hart Plaza occupies was once one of the last stops on the Underground Railroad. This was known as the Gateway to Freedom. Here you can see the conductor of the Underground Railroad pointing the slaves to freedom across the Detroit River. And partway between the Gateway to Freedom and the Horus and Sun Fountain was this monument. I didn't know what to make of this at first, really. I was down there with my friend William Henry, and he pointed out to me, kind of looks like the Tower of Babel. Even look around the top here. You got all these cameras. We look at those as, symbolically speaking, the watchers. Why not? Why not? And of course, we can refer to the Tower of Babel as the gateway to the gods. We already looked at the Horus and Sun Fountain, but they rededicated it for Detroit's 300th birthday, gave it a brand new plaque, and now the plaque reads, "This is an engine of water at the gateway to a great city," referring to Hart Plaza once again as a gateway. And this is the real gateway. This is the focal point of Hart Plaza right here, the transcending gateway. Many of these monuments will be named in the recognition of transformation. It's very important just to look at the names of some of these monuments. It's a pretty much dead giveaway. And this is a 63-foot tall monument. And according to David Barr, who is the artist, he says this is symbolic of a gear protruding from the earth. This is actually UAW monument, United Auto Workers. And he says the opening at the top, that's symbolic of the work or the labor that is yet to be done. And I think when we hear the word labor, we can think of a birthing process, maybe even a rebirthing process. Now, I see what David Barr's saying. It's a UAW monument. Kind of looks like a gear. When I'm looking at this thing, to me it looks like a Stargate. And local Detroiters, you know, everybody says, meet me down at the Stargate monument. That's just what everybody calls it. So I actually wrote Mr. Barr and asked him. It's like, I know you say this is symbolic of a gear, but did a Stargate ever, cross your mind while you were designing the transcending monument? David Barr actually wrote me back. I didn't expect him to. He wrote me back. Said, sorry, Chad. Stargate never crossed my mind. But that being said, the green granite spiral, there's a green granite spiral that leads around and through the center of the gateway. He says the green granite spiral, that allows the visitor, or the spectator, to leave the grid of the city for the sphere of space. So I'm like, wow, to me, David Barr just unconsciously described a Stargate. How better do you describe an urban portal than to allow the spectator to leave the grid of the city for the sphere of space? So that's all in a small little 9-acre area known as Hart Plaza in the heart of downtown Detroit. And surely you can work on your heart chakra down here. There's no doubt about it. And tomorrow, just 3 blocks north of here is its sister complex, Campus Mars. And wait till you see what's at Campus Mars. And I'll get into that tomorrow, but Stargate Detroit, this is, I believe, it's a cosmic temple. And when you go down here and you start seeing these monuments and you read the signs and you start seeing the monuments and the park from a new perspective or from a new light, that is a large personal transformation. And when you start to follow the path or the Stargate trail, following these clues, these synchronicities, these coincidences, even archetypes, it gives you a sense of relationship to the cosmic flows of the universe. And that, in general, is the power of Stargate Detroit. It's a place we can go and connect with stellar energies. Now what I'd like to do, I just skimmed through Detroit. I'm going to really get into detail about it tomorrow. But I'd like to go through the Midwest a little bit and show you a few other cities and how this symbolism is showing up everywhere. So we'll move over to the Windy City, Chicago. Not too far from here. I think we can't all go to, say, the Giza Pyramids or these incredible sacred sites around the world every year, but I think if we want, we can make a trip to Detroit or to Chicago. And realistically, I think we can connect with the same energies. So this is the park we're going to look at in Chicago. Brand new park called Millennium Park. Built in 2004. It's the largest rooftop garden in the world. And the first thing I'd like to point out Millennium Park, by taking the bird's eye perspective, looking down at it, you have this incredible serpent bridge. Then you have these green and growing gardens, which I speculate, could these be symbolic of the chakra system, considering we have the serpent bridge? Could we look at this as the Kundalini bridge or the life force energy bridge? But if it is, why is it not coiling up the chakra system? Where is it trying to lead? So we're going to follow the serpent bridge or the Kundalini bridge and see where it's taking us. And this was done by an artist by the name of Frank Gehry. And what I'd like to point out about the serpent bridge is you have the serpent and the cosmic egg. Rather common symbolism. In Peebles, Ohio, at the Serpent Mound, you got the serpent and the cosmic egg. Many different crop circles have had the same symbolism, and I think we can consider this the serpent and the cosmic egg also. And what we know about bridges in particular, bridges separate separate realms. And in this particular case, the serpent bridge separates the realms of the green and growing gardens to the east to the realm of the gates to the west. Yeah, this is J. Pritzker Pavilion, most intricate outdoor amphitheater in North America. You have these speakers on the trellis system, and the tunes and the tones, the frequency and the vibrations literally surround you. And I like to get other people's opinions on these monuments sometimes, so I came across this from Ann Raver, the New York Times. According to Ann Raver, when she saw the Pritzker Pavilion for the first time, she thought its maw of curling steel looked like a celestial gateway to another universe. I can kind of see what she's saying. These are the urban activators, and there was 2 of them there. I say there was because these were temporary exhibits. Every year Millennium Park has new exhibits. This was last year's. The urban activators, and they are what they say they are. They were meant to energetically activate the viewer and the spectator. And at night, just as many of these other monuments, they changed the colors of the rainbow. Right next to the urban activators was the crown fountain. You had these 2 giant fountains that project the faces of local Chicago citizens, and from their mouth they blast out the jet of life. And what happened to me when I was here is I went out in the middle of this reflection pool with all these children to get these photos, and quite unexpectedly, I had to take my shoes off, and it was almost as if you could soak up the energy of these children through your feet. By the time I was probably in here 3 minutes, and the time I walked out, I felt like I was a 5-year-old. It was not what I was expecting. But I think if there's anywhere at Millennium Park to go to open and lighten your heart, it's most likely right here at the Crown Fountain. And at night, it changes the colors of the rainbow, as many of these monuments and many of these other parks do after dark. When we see all these monuments changing the colors of the rainbow, we can contemplate the Rainbow Bridge, a communications link between the humanity and the gods, the earthly realms, the heavenly realms, and even ourselves and our higher selves. I believe that's what this Rainbow Bridge symbolism is pointing to. And the focal point of Millennium Park, Cloud Gate. Each one of these parks will have a focal point named in the recognition of transformation. Detroit, it was transcending. Here it's Cloud Gate. This was done by a British artist by the name of Anish Kapoor. According to Mr. Kapoor, he says that this was symbolic of a liquid drop of mercury. And alchemists were convinced that mercury transcended both the solids, the liquid states, both earth and heaven, life and death. And, of course, one of the symbols for mercury is the serpent. Now, what he wanted to do with this, in his own words, is he wanted to create a sculpture that would manipulate the viewer's relationship with time and space. And he did an amazing job of it. Because when you look at this monument, what it does, not only does it distort the surrounding skyline, but it actually slows down the people and the clouds passing by it. So in a very literal sense, when you're looking at the outside of Cloud Gate, it does distort your time and space. And that's why you're just looking at the outside of it. Not only does Cloud Gate reflect the outside world, but it seems to dematerialize the world when you walk underneath of it. You walk underneath and you look up, and I call this the Cloud Gate portal. You literally watch yourself transcend through this portal here. It's an amazing, amazing experience. Here I am taking a picture, and if you look close, you can see me just, going through this portal. And when you're having this experience in real time, it's amazing. And according to Anish Kapoor, Cloud Gate should survive for at least another 1,000 years. And I'm thinking Cloud Gate is most likely creating a ceremonial and sacred space right underneath it, right where it sits. 1 million people a year go and visit Cloud Gate. Imagine if just a portion of them could recognize the symbolism and have a transformational experience. The effect that this one monument for 1,000 years, on 1 million people a year, what kind of effect could this have on society? This is just one monument in one park. We got to include all these parks and all these monuments. So we're just going to sum it up right there with Chicago. And we're not getting a chance today to see some of the symbolism that radiates out from these parks. Today we're just focusing on the parks. But there's incredible symbolism that radiates out from these parks also. But we crossed the Serpent Bridge, checked out the Pritchard Pavilion, the Celestial Gateway, lightened your heart at Crown Fountain, get activated energetically at the Urban Activators, and go through the Cloud Gate portal. All in a day of fun at Millennium Park. Sticking to the Midwest, we're going to go to St. Louis. And I think most of us know the icon of St. Louis, the Gateway Arch. Of course, the Gateway Arch. And with many of these cities, St. Louis is located on a piece of sacred landscape, City of the Sun, better known to most of us as Cahokia Mounds. And I just want to point out this one mound. This is Monk's Mound. It's the largest mound there. Here's a scale size of Monk's Mound next to the Great Pyramid. This is enormous, enormous. The base is larger, and if the sides would have continued up, this mound, it's just a mound of earth, would have been larger than the Great Pyramid. It's the largest earthen structure in the Western Hemisphere. And it's same trend as Detroit, some of these other cities, lots of ancient relics discovered in these mounds. We're not going to get into it tonight, but a lot of these ancient relics correlate too. You find a lot of the same theology on these relics. But what comes into fruition is an icon of St. Louis, the Gateway Arch. This was done by, as I mentioned, Eero Saarinen, the same guy who envisioned Hart Plaza back in Detroit. 630 feet tall, 630 feet wide. This is our nation's tallest national monument. And according to Eero Saarinen, he said the major concern was to create a monument which would have a lasting significance and would be a landmark of our time. Neither an obelisk, a rectangular box, nor a dome seemed right on this site for this purpose. But right here, the edge of the Mississippi River, a great arch did seem right. Just seemed to fit in. And when you compare some of these cities, you start to come up with a lot of coincidences, maybe synchronicities, call it what you want, but I just want to go over a few of them. Of course, in Stargate, Detroit, in 1947, Eero Saarinen imagined Hart Plaza. 1947, he also imagined the Gateway Arch. Hart Plaza is located off Jefferson Avenue. Gateway Arch, the Jefferson National Expansion. I mean, even little things like the area code. Detroit's 313, St. Louis is 314. They're both off freshwater rivers, Detroit and the Mississippi. They're both off sacred landscapes. Both had ancient relics discovered in the same vicinity. They're both made out of stainless steel. Transcending is 63 feet and the Gateway Arch is 630 feet. A lot of similarities. None of these artists didn't know each other. It's like the symbolism was just supposed to be or meant to be in these cities. And although Saarinen built this to be symbolic of an arch, he wanted it to be symbolic of an obelisk when you viewed it from the side. So in this one monument, he incorporated both the male and the female symbolism, the womb and the phallic symbol. Now, personally, the first time I drove into town to go check this out, I seen this thing glistening in the city lights, glistening like the rainbow. First thing that came to my head, and I mean, I got rainbows on my head at this point because I'm doing research, but it was the Rainbow Bridge. And of course, like I mentioned, the Rainbow Bridge can be considered a communications link between humanity and the gods, earthly realms and the heavenly realms, and ourselves and our higher selves. But just because this thing glistens in the colors of the rainbow, I didn't feel that was quite enough, to come up here and actually talk about it. So I went inside. You can actually take a tram ride to the top of the Gateway Arch. So I decided I'd go there and take the tram ride and just, see what I saw. And, And the first thing you see when you go into the underworld or the basement of the Gateway Arch to take the tram ride, this giant mural. 45 feet long, 15 foot tall brick mural. And this is dedicated to all the artists and all the architects who built our nation's national monuments. And what you see is, of course, the obelisk, Mount Rushmore, the Gateway Arch, Statue of Liberty. Does anybody recognize any monument in this picture that wasn't built by one of these gentlemen up here? The Rainbow Bridge. Utah's Rainbow Bridge sits right behind Lady Liberty. And of course, the Statue of Liberty, she's officially titled Liberty Enlightening the World. Utah's Rainbow Bridge is described as the world's largest natural bridge. And when I seen this, to me, this depiction is highly similar to ancient Christian art, with Jesus sitting on the Rainbow Bridge. Or in our Capitol Dome of the United States, William Henry has pointed out that George Washington, he hovers on the Rainbow Bridge just like Jesus. But, I didn't recall seeing Liberty on the Rainbow Bridge. So I actually Googled Liberty and Rainbow Bridge to see what popped up. And, well, she pops up in front of this bridge down here in Japan. I'm like, wow, that's pretty cool. Very similar depiction, but not quite what I was looking for, or so I thought. Come to find out, that's actually the Rainbow Bridge. That's what it's called. That's Tokyo's Rainbow Bridge, and there, Lady Liberty is enlightening the world in front of these rainbow bridges all over the world. St. Louis, D.C., Tokyo, and there's other examples out there. Then I recalled, there she is. I had seen her on the bridge before. She's right next to the father of our country, George. Liberty riding a rainbow bridge, holding her book of secrets and her labyrinth axe. So, at that point I'm thinking there's some rainbow bridge symbolism here in the Gateway Arch. To me, no question about it. So there's one last monument before you actually got on the tram ride, and it's this Mark Twain exhibit, this Prohibition exhibit, and you have these children, what they do while they're waiting to get on the tram ride is they weigh themselves. And whoever was lighter thought they got to get on the tram ride first, which kind of surprised me. When I'm a kid, I'm thinking whoever's the tallest or whoever's the heaviest, you're growing up. Whoever was lighter, I watched 3 sets of kids do this, thought they got to get on the tram ride first, which brought to my mind the Judgment Day ceremony of the ancient Egyptian weighing of the heart, where they'd weigh the heart against the feathers of Ma'at. If the heart weighed less than the feather, you were permitted access to cross the rainbow bridge to the dimension of the blessed. To me, very similar scenario. So when the door opens, the tram car, imagine the surprise when you realize the actual door that takes you to the top, it's a sun with a door that you get in. And you think of a sun door, can't we think of a Stargate, at least symbolically? Next stop, top of the Rainbow Bridge, or the Gateway Arch. You get to the top of the Gateway Arch, and this is your view. Your Jefferson National Expansion, the old courthouse, and we're going to look at some of the symbolism and the sculptures down here in just a few minutes. I'm not trying to compare myself to Jesus or George Washington by any means up here, but what I'm saying is if we can recognize this rainbow bridge symbolism, I think we can use monuments such as these as catalyst for working on and activating our own personal rainbow bridges, our chakra system. Here's an ancient depiction of this. Queen Elizabeth raising the rainbow bridge. And I believe for the most part this is the same depiction, only more modern, of raising our inner rainbow bridge. So when we see depictions like these, well, we got these fully activated, transformed figures sitting in front of these rainbow-like concentric rings. What I'm thinking we're looking at, I'm thinking we're looking up into the end of the rainbow, so to speak. And these are your pots of gold, alchemically speaking, at the end of the rainbow. And I think this is something we can all do and all work on. These are the pots of gold at the end of the rainbow. So when we see this architecture that has the symbols of the rainbow rings, or even the Gateway Arch, I think we can use these as catalysts. Catalysts in the process of, 1, sparking our imagination, 2, opening and enlightening our hearts, and I think most importantly, activating our rainbow bridges, our chakra systems. Now we're still in the Gateway Arch. We're back in the basement now. I mean, this is pretty amazing. This is like looking at the Transcending Monument in Detroit, but you can actually go inside of this thing and walk around, go to the top. I mean, there's not too many monuments in the world where you can do this. And you go down to the basement, and the centerpiece of the basement is a sculpture of Thomas Jefferson. This is Jefferson National Expansion, of course. He's standing on this dot surrounded by concentric rings. Well, rather than speculate what this means, I'll tell you what the artist said. He says, Thomas Jefferson standing down here in this dot surrounded by concentric rings is symbolic of a space-time continuum. So visitors can get an appropriate three-dimensional visitor experience. So in the underworld of the basement of the Rainbow Bridge or the Gateway Arch, we have Thomas Jefferson standing, in the artist's own words, in a space-time continuum, a Stargate. So now we're going to leave the Gateway Arch. So far we're just been inside this one incredible monument. We're going to look at the Gateway Mall. And we're just going to have to skim through this due to time, but there's got to be good 30 to 40 incredible sculptures lining the way through this Gateway Mall. I mean, just amazing symbolism this whole way. So I believe it's like 4 blocks of just nothing but sculptures and beautiful stuff. The first sculpture I'd like to look at, this is a sculpture of Eros, the Greek god. And this is supposed to be symbolic of a relic of the Greek god discovered. And Eros is one of those gods, like many others, that has taken over many personifications over the years. And originally he was hatched from the cosmic egg, along with Gaia. This is a beautiful painting by my friend Patty Lou back here. And Eros also took on the personification of Cupid. That's the one, most people are familiar with, is Cupid, the god of love and desire. And I love this painting. You got Eros going through this like vibratory wormhole, and you have these 2 eyes or irises staring back at you. I didn't know what to make of those irises at first. So I did a little digging and come to find out, in a less known personification of Eros, his mother was actually Iris, the rainbow goddess. In Greek mythology, Iris took on the personification of the rainbow. She was a messenger goddess, and she was the goddess of the rainbow bridge. And of course, our iris of our eyes are named after Iris, the rainbow goddess. And the reason I point this out is because what happens when you go down here to City Garden and Gateway Mall, you have the opportunity to become the irises of Eros. When you climb into Eros' head, you become the iris, and you look out, and guess what you look at? You look back at the throne of Iris, the rainbow goddess. And recall who this was designed and created by? Eero Saarinen. Eero Saarinen. And do I think this symbolism right here was intentional? No, I don't. I think this was unconscious. I think these monuments are just being placed where they're supposed to be at the right time. And some of this symbolism is working its way unconsciously into the blueprints of these artists and these architects. Now, recall Eros originally was hatched from the cosmic egg in one personification, which will bring us to our next sculpture. The Door of Return. Giant cosmic egg up top. And once again, I'm going to tell you the artist says, and what comes right out of this is the City Garden brochure. I'm not making this stuff up. The egg-shaped form at the top of the door resembles a seed that is just split open, or a mouth that opens to the sky like a baby's first cry. Artist Ken Yasuda has left the answer deliberately ambiguous, leading us to think about time and space, life and death, the past and the present, and when we pass through the door, what is the place we are returning to? The Door of Return, another one of these monuments named the recognition of transformation. And right next, well, I like to call this a Door of Return action. You see this little boy here seems to be in a state of pure wonder, almost as if he recognizes that seed up there, or recognizes this door. And right next to the Door of Return is another monument. It's entitled the 2 White Rabbits. You have these 2 white rabbits. They're sitting on their rabbit holes. And when I see these giant white rabbits sitting on their rabbit holes, what comes to my mind is, well, Alice in Wonderland, going down the rabbit hole. Or even what the bleep do we know? Down the rabbit hole, drawing a wormhole into our consciousness. Not too long ago, the movie The Last Mimsy. A scientist sends back a white rabbit through a Stargate to the past. More recently, the movie Knowing. Before these children depart with these 2 light beings, they carry their 2 white rabbits. So when I see the white rabbits down at City Garden, Gateway Mall, I'm thinking rabbit holes and wormhole symbolism. And we're going to sum up Stargate St. Louis like that. We looked at the Rainbow Bridge, Gateway Arch, of course Liberty in front of it, the Door of Return, the white rabbits and their rabbit holes, and we didn't get to Zenith today, but, another credible monument. So what I think is happening is, I think humanity, we're being downloaded with this Stargate, wormhole, gateway symbolism, and we're being done so through mass media and many other ways, but most importantly and most prominently, I believe, through this art and through this architecture. It's showing up, and it's only starting to be recognized right now as if the time is right, and that time is now, I believe. So I want to show you a few other cities just really briefly. I'm going to skim through them, but just kind of make a point how this is taking place all over North America. Actually, the world for that case, but all over North America. So this is Bicentennial Mall in Nashville. This is kind of where it all started with William Henry, discovering some of the incredible symbolism incorporated in this mall. He says this is a 2,200-foot antenna. This park is a literal transmitter and receiver. And as with many of these other parks, it's built upon a sacred landscape. Capitol building actually sits on top of an ancient mound. More relics discovered. And William points out the blueprint, the Bicentennial Mall, highly resembles the ancient blueprint of Mount Meru. Meru was considered the seat of cosmic powers, the axis that connected the earth with the universe, the super antenna of the inflow and the outflow of spiritual energies on our planet. And this is a place where you can go and connect with these energies. Not only that, but he points out that in Robert Flood's drawing of the perfected man, it indicates that the mall symbolizes higher consciousness. See the cord of 3 stars and the triceps symbolizing higher consciousness there? Look at a few of the monuments. This is the black sun, a beacon of the Mount Meru pillar, and, you know, enough said, kind of looks like a Stargate. The court of 3 stars. You have this giant court surrounded by 50 pillars. And these pillars all have bells in them, and they ring and vibrate every so often. And they encapsulate the red, white, and blue granite court of 3 stars. Like I mentioned, granite is filled with quartz crystal. Perfect transmitter and receiver. This is a place you can, just like Detroit, just like Chicago, St. Louis, that you can go and connect with these cosmic and these stellar energies. Dallas. Who thought there could be a Stargate park in Dallas? Well, there is. This is called Thanksgiving Square. And you have the Spiral Tower, or the Thanksgiving Chapel. Once again, highly resembles the Tower of Babel, the gateway to the gods. Then you go inside the Spiral Tower and you look up into the glory window. And this window symbolizes the blessing of the divine descending to the earth, as well as the ascent of human praise to the gratitude of God. And you go outside, and here's your focal point. It's called the Ring of Thanks, the Circle of Giving. And it's a Stargate symbol. 23 karat gold leaf. It's 14 feet wide. Has 7 white granite stepping stones that serve as a walkway through the ring, which is mounted within a gray granite circle of giving. Notice there's a lot of granite, a lot of quartz going on around these monuments. And what I'd like to point out, this is in Dallas, Ring of Thanks, Detroit Transcending. Built 10 years apart, these artists did not know each other, but the symbolism incorporated is identical. And these are the plaques that come along with them on the walls. And as you can see here, it says right down here, you circle into the Ring of Thanksgiving. And over here in Detroit, you do the same thing. You spiral around the green granite spiral that allows you to leave the grid of the city for the sphere of space. Absolutely identical symbolism showing up in different cities. Artists had no clue about each other. Stargate, Colorado. Of all places, Colorado, the Garden of the Gods. Once again, a sacred landscape. And there's actually a Tower of Babel rock. There's a Gateway rock. But what kind of park is going to emerge near the Garden of the Gods? Well, this is called America the Beautiful. Another brand new park. The name of that fountain back there, this is the Continuum Fountain. And if anyone knows anything about the science fiction Stargate, there's the Stargate Continuum, and the original series took place at Cheyenne Mountain in Colorado, which is right there. Fiction, non-fiction. Like, this is a Stargate video game. I mean, this is starting to become a reach, but it works. You got the obelisk and the Stargate. And then you come back to Colorado and you got the obelisk and the Stargate. Fiction, non-fiction. Fiction, non-fiction. Now, I mentioned in my intro that these things are hidden in plain sight, just waiting to be recognized. It's waiting to be utilized. But they're in plain sight, all right. All you got to do is go to these parks and look at the names. Look what's written on the wall in stone, literally. More times than not, the focal points of these plazas will be named in the recognition of transformation. So I just want to go through a few of these monuments to prove my point. Of course, in Detroit, we had the Transcending Monument. In Warren, done by the same artist, this is Dawn, dawning of a new day. We looked at the Gateway to Freedom. We didn't get to it today. This is in Birmingham, this rainbow ring, the journey home. Cloud Gate, the urban activators. The Gateway Arch and the door of return. The Ring of Thanks. And of course, the Continuum Fountain. So the symbolism is showing up everywhere. Dawn, Continuum, Transcending, Ring of Thanks, the Journey Home. Here's some rainbow rings. These are actually in Grand Rapids, by the way. But the same symbolism is emerging absolutely everywhere. So what do we make of the fact that this incredible Stargate, Gateway, Egyptian architecture and symbolism is showing up in our cities, just waiting to be recognized, waiting to be utilized? Well, I think when we start seeing these monuments, and we start recognizing the symbolism, we'll start seeing not only these monuments, but the parks in a whole new light, and a new perspective. And that in turn can help us to see ourselves and the world around us in that new light. And that's a large personal transformation. And when we see the symbol of the ring, or even the arch, and they've been placed on pieces of sacred landscape, they've been named in the recognition of transformation, can't we start to use them as such? Can't we start to use these as tools? Tools of transformation. Tools we can use to work on our light bodies and our rainbow bodies. Tools we can use to spark our imaginations. Tools we can use to open, enlighten our hearts. And I think the answer to that is absolutely. I think we can start right now. So the message I would like everyone to take home. Personally, I believe the cloud gates, they may be parting. I believe the door of return, it may be slowly cracking open, giving us all glimpses of what's expected of us, preparatory to our journey home. And just as Dr. Martin Luther King once proclaimed in his I Have a Dream speech in Detroit, I believe now is the time to begin carving tunnels of hope through the mountains of despair, to start transforming dark yesterdays into bright tomorrows. I think this is something each and every one of us can do by, one, recognizing the symbolism, tuning into it, utilizing it, and beginning to transcend these gateways to freedom. So once again, we can be, cosmically speaking, free at last.
Good afternoon, everybody. I appreciate everybody coming. I briefly touched on Stargate Detroit yesterday, but I didn't get the opportunity to make a lot of the connections I really want to make, a lot of the correlations. So today I'm going to go into a lot more detail about some of the symbolism of Stargate Detroit. And there's an amazing amount, as I mentioned, of Gateway, Stargate, and ancient Egyptian symbolism located in downtown Detroit here. And not only that, but Hart Plaza, the plaza we're going to talk about, emerged on a piece of sacred landscape. This landscape has been considered sacred for hundreds, maybe thousands of years, not only to the native American Indians, but possibly another outside race we'll talk about in a second. And these monuments, they've been hidden in plain sight down here at Hart Plaza. And they're very easy to recognize. I like to say usually they're hidden in plain sight, waiting to be recognized. But they're easy to recognize. All you got to do is read the names to these monuments and take a few minutes to see what the artist had to say about them. And they will tell you 9 times out of 10 exactly what was meant by these monuments down here. So today we're going to go through, we're going to look at some of the artists and some of the comments they had in regards to Hart Plaza and this urban portal, as I like to refer to it. And there is gateway and Stargate symbolism everywhere. So I want to refresh everybody's memory on the symbol of the gateway. A gateway can represent a sense of passing from one state to another, one world to another, and the known to the unknown. But they also can take on a quality that indicates a threshold to us and invites us to cross that threshold. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to cross that threshold today by looking at some of the symbolism incorporated down here at Hart Plaza. And I like to refer to this now as Stargate Detroit, considering all the Stargate symbolism we're actually going to find down here. And I mentioned this last night, but if nobody was there, I want to clarify the kind of Stargate we're going to be looking at today. Originally, most of us probably hear the word Stargate and think of the science fiction movies, science fiction depictions, where you can go through this ring-like object and travel intergalactic space at less than the speed of light. It's a little different than the kind of Stargate symbolism I'm talking about today. This is at Hart Plaza, the transcending monument. The kind of Stargate we're talking about has best been described by investigative mythologist William Henry as a place on Earth that's a shamanic transportal to other worlds, where energy ringing and pulsing from our star, our sun, other stars, and even other star systems is easily received, and I believe transmitted. And that's what these Stargate parks are. But in particular, Stargate Detroit. It's a place we can go and connect with stellar energies. And pretty much all these artists we're going to talk about today, they went down there and they've connected with these stellar energies. And they'll tell us exactly how. So I want to go over a little bit of the history of the area that Hart Plaza occupies. 1701, Antoine Cadillac, this is the founder of Detroit, a French explorer. He sails out of Canada with 300 men. They're coming up the Detroit River looking for the perfect spot to found the new city of Detroit. And they come to the narrowest part of the river shore, and Cadillac points out the perfect spot. They pull their boats ashore, he plants his flag. The perfect area was Hart Plaza. Now, Hart Plaza, or the area it was located, this was a sacred landscape to the local Native Americans. When Cadillac was coming up the river, there used to be stone monuments dotting the landscape, ancient burial mounds, temple mounds, burial mounds, and right up the river it was called the River Red Rouge Mound. And this mound was 100 feet wide by 200 feet long. It was almost as big as Monk's Mound. I mean, just enormous, enormous. Now, what was really interesting is when they started excavating Detroit and digging into these mounds, they started uncovering a lot of relics. And not only that, these mounds here, well, many feel the Native Americans built these mounds. And surely the Native Americans did build many of these mounds. But in Detroit in particular, when a lot of the natives were asked who built these mounds, they said it wasn't us. But we do recall legends that our ancestors told us that an ancient civilization had came to Michigan to dig for copper. They had built these mounds. So imagine the disbelief when archaeologists, citizens, farmers, they start excavating these mounds. They start discovering relics such as these. These are known as the mystical Michigan relics. And the first thing I'd like to point out is this symbol. This is the mystical Michigan symbol, and it's incorporated at some place on every one of these relics. And there was 3,000 to 10,000 of these found in these ancient mounds. A lot of them were clay relics such as these, clay pipes, pottery. Lots are copper relics, copper tablets and crowns. Remember, the natives had legends that outside race that came here to dig for copper. A lot of copper found in these mounds. The most impressive were probably these slate relics. The majority of them are relics like these. And what I'd like to point out is the theology on these. It's almost an Egyptian theology, Coptic or Gnostic possibly. But when archaeologists seen these in the late 1800s, there's no way white man predated Columbus. No way, according to archaeologists. They said, the theology's wrong. No white man was here before Columbus. These are forged. These gotta be a hoax. And they even pointed the finger at these two guys. They called these guys the culprits. This was Father James Savage and ex-Secretary of State Daniel Soper. They felt what these guys must be doing, because they were discovering a lot of these relics. They felt these guys must be going in a barn or back shed somewhere, hoaxing these relics, traveling around the entire state of Michigan, including the Upper Peninsula, finding ancient burial mounds, sometimes on private property, going in there, burying these relics, coming back years later, bringing witnesses and digging them up. They felt these guys did this for some 30-odd years, under scrutiny from the very get-go, by the way. Never were charged, but that's where the story ends as far as archaeologists. It was a hoax. These guys did it. They can't carbon date the slate, and they didn't get anything out of the mounds back in the 1800s because there wasn't carbon dating. Absolutely. Absolutely. As we're concerned, these relics here, the Michigan relics, were a hoax. And now a good portion of these reside at the Michigan Historical Museum in a back room collecting dust. Can't look at them. It took me a year and a half to get these pictures and actually let the archaeologists get me in to see them. Bribing, everything. They don't want you to know about these for some reason. But there's another side to the story. A couple of decades ago, a Supreme Court judge caught wind of these relics. He could not comprehend how two gentlemen could have hoaxed and manufactured this entire cache of relics. One, a sheer numbers issue. Anywhere from 3 to 10,000 of these while under scrutiny. Two, well, the theology on these started to make more sense after 1920 or so in the discovery of the Pistis Sophia. After that, this theology that was supposedly all wrong started to make sense. It's not enough for the archaeologist, obviously. But anyway, so what the judge did, he said, if all these are manufactured by two guys, there should only be two handwriting styles. He had a professional handwriting analysis done. And that came back saying every one of the tablets that was looked at, and there was a couple thousand of them, was done by a different hand. Not only that, but it was done fluently, not as if you were copying it out of a different text. So that's kind of where the story resides today. Archaeologists say these are a hoax and really don't want this information out there. Very few people, even here in Michigan, know about these, let alone outside of Michigan. So I just want to show you a couple more of these amazing relics. Tower of Babel, Gateway to the Gods. The Pale One. Just amazing relics. Now, one of the archaeologists' main queries about these, they say they got the entire collection in the museum. Soper and Savage collection, they got it, and there's no other relics like this out there. Well, that's not true. I've known this not to be true for a while. Friend and colleague Wayne May does Ancient American Magazine. He's got a collection of them in his museum in New York. And just recently, actually like 3 months ago now, a gentleman from Southgate, Michigan had read one of my articles about the relics online and contacted me. He said, you know what? My great-grandfather, when he was excavating a basement in Detroit back in the early 1900s, he personally uncovered a whole cache of these relics in an ancient mound. And they've been in my attic collecting dust for years. So I drove down there and I actually got a hold of Wayne May. He brought a professional archaeologist with him. We went down to visit Ted Bell and see his collection. And they're the same relics. There's no question. These are the exact same relics. And they couldn't do carbon dating because they don't have any of the earth, where they actually got these relics out of the mounds. But according to the archaeologist who was there, from him looking at them, he had his microscopes out and everything. I don't know much about archaeology, but he thought they were legit. He thought they were legit. This is an ossuary box. These things are amazing. And there's tons of them. I just want to bring some awareness to this story. I'm hoping somebody can help me crack this case. What's going on here? It should have been cracked when they did the handwriting analysis. In New York, Wayne May from Ancient American Magazine. Nowhere in Michigan. Nope. And you can call the Historical Museum and ask them, and it'll take you about a year. Then they have to let you in after a certain amount of time. So I'm just brushing the surface on this story. If you're interested, I go a lot more into detail in my book, The Mystical Mitten here. But the point I'm making is that the area that Hart Plaza now occupies, not only was it a sacred landscape to the Native Americans, but possibly another race even before them had came here and considered this sacred and hallowed ground. So now we're going to move up the timeline a little bit. Time of the Founding Fathers, 1800s. This is Augustus Woodward. Anyone familiar with downtown Detroit knows the main street going through downtown is Woodward Avenue. This is named after Augustus Woodward. Augustus Woodward, he was a Freemason, and he was best friends with Thomas Jefferson. He was actually known as Jefferson's disciple. Well, in 1805, just after Jefferson's appointed president, he appoints his buddy Augustus Woodward to come out to Detroit to become the first Chief Justice of the state of Michigan. His nickname was actually Augustus Justice. He gets to Detroit, and the city had just coincidentally burnt down in the Great Fire of 1805. So he appoints himself city planner to redesign the city and the street layouts of Detroit. This is a street layout he designed in 1805. Well, not only was he friends with Jefferson, but he was also friends with French architect Pierre L'Enfant, designer of the Washington, D.C. city layout. What happens is, as the story goes, while they're in D.C., Woodward here, over L'Enfant's shoulder, copies down his symbolism and his plans for Washington, D.C. into his own personal notebook. And when Jefferson appoints him to come out here to Michigan, appoints himself city planner, and for the most part incorporates identical symbolism. Not only did he incorporate the pentagram, I believe, but the Freemasonic scale. And many people feel Pierre L'Enfant's doing this was, the eye sees what the eye wants to see, and this was just coincidence. But I'm thinking if Woodward copied down his symbolism, and the same symbolism shows up in Detroit, this wasn't coincidence. This was all meant to be. These cities are laid out in sacred geometry right from their inceptions. And we'll get back to that in a few minutes. Moving up the timeline, 1947, Detroit's doing some upgrades to the riverfront. They hire the architect firm of Saarinen and Saarinen from Cranbrook Institute. Earl Saarinen proposes we need to have a civic center at the base of Woodward and Jefferson, hence Augustus Woodward and Thomas Jefferson. The same year, as I mentioned last night, he's imagining another idea, the Gateway Arch. This guy's having incredible ideas back in 1947, and that's an important year. Yes, sir. He was a senator in Detroit, Senator Philip H. Hart. As you mentioned, we're about to look at Hart Plaza. Earl Saarinen's idea in 1947. Around 30 years later, Japanese-American artist Osamu Noguchi comes to town and implements this idea. I pointed this out last night, but this is very important. What Noguchi did is he orientated and correlated Hart Plaza to the Giza pyramids and plateau. At least that's what I see. I believe the amphitheater, the Horus and Sun fountain, and the pyramid are aligned to the Giza pyramids. You have the causeway that leads to the Sphinx and Hart Plaza. From the Horus and Sun fountain, a causeway that leads to the pylon. Well, the pylon sits at the entrance to Hart Plaza. In ancient Egypt, pylons would sit at the entrances to cosmic temples. And that's exactly what I propose Hart Plaza is. It's a cosmic temple. Now we'll talk about why Noguchi and how Noguchi may have came up with this idea. But as far as our ancients, the ancient civilizations have been doing this for thousands of years. This is nothing new. And I came across this quote that kind of helped to explain why the ancients did this. And it's from E.C. Krupp in his book, The Echoes of the Ancient Skies. And he says the cosmos itself is what mattered to our ancestors. Their lives, their beliefs, their destinies were all part of this bigger pageant. Just as the environment of their temples was made sacred by metaphors of cosmic order, entire cities and great ritual centers were also astronomically aligned and organized. Each sacred capital restated the theme of cosmic order in terms of its builder's own perceptions of the universe, principles which the society considered its own, which ordered its life, gave it its character, were borrowed from the sky and built into the plans of the cities. That's perceivably what I believe Osamu Noguchi did down here. So what we're going to do is go through these couple monuments, and we did this last night, but I just skimmed through it, so I'm going to get into some detail about these monuments that I propose are correlated to the Giza Plateau. See if we come up with any Egyptian or gateway symbolism, so have you. What we know about amphitheaters are transmitters, receivers of frequency and vibration, tunes and tones. The way I like to describe this, you have whoever happens to be performing on stage, and they're sending out the tunes and the tones. The audience is receiving them, vibing off them. Many times vibing off them is one. They'll send this energy back to the performer. Many times the performer will step it up a notch, literally amp it up, send this energy back. Before you know it, it's like you get this biofeedback of energy, and you get these bowls or amphitheaters just ringing, sometimes in a vibration of pure oneness, pure love. And this amphitheater in particular is all done in red granite, lots of quartz crystal. It's a transmitter and a receiver. Surely this amphitheater is soaking up this energy. Surely these people are soaking up some previous energy also. By the way, that's my wife up there feeling it. So in the heart of Detroit, Heart of Heart Plaza, is the Horus and Sun Fountain. Amazing fountain done by the same artist, Osamu Noguchi. 300 lights around the top of it, blast this giant jet of water into what they describe as the mound-like pool. And according to Noguchi, this is symbolic of our relationship to outer space, in his own words. And at night, it kind of looks like a UFO when the 300 lights are flashing. In the daytime, you get scenarios like this. People go down and play in the rainbow, try to catch the rainbow, take their kids down there. A lot of rainbow symbolism will be following around these Stargate parks. Now, the fountain itself is dedicated to Horace Dodge from Dodge Automobile Pioneers, talking about Detroit down here. Well, Horus, I think that's synchronistic. We're looking for Egyptian symbolism. Horus, the mythological figure. And, well, this is dedicated to Horus and Sun. Horus's son's name is Horus Jr. Egyptian mythology, some cases, there's a Horus the Elder and a Horus the Son. Horus the Elder, he was born in Niles, Michigan. When he passed away, he was buried right next to his brother John, his best friend, off 8 Mile and Woodlawn Cemetery. In this Egyptian-style mausoleum, flanked by 2 sphinx, and it's surrounded by obelisks. I mean, a lot of Egyptian symbolism following Horus Dodge here. I've done a lot of research and can't find anywhere saying how Horus Dodge is interested in Egypt or anything. But a lot of symbolism surrounding him. So I actually went out here to get these pictures and kind of going around just taking snapshots, and something glowing red caught the corner of my eye coming from inside the mausoleum. Feeling a little uneasy about climbing up on Morris's mausoleum. You know, I had to see what was in there though. So I get up there and look in the door. The entire back of the mausoleum is a stained glass relief of the Egyptian pyramids. So I'm thinking maybe Horus Dodge, could he have taken on the archetype of Horus, the mythological figure? Possibly. A lot of the symbolism surrounding him. Skipping back in time just a little bit, when Horus made his first big sum of money with Dodge Motors. He grew up broke in Niles, Michigan. His family was really poor. So he made his first big sum of money. He went out and bought a yacht, the SS Delphine, named it after his daughter. And this yacht was used all the way up into World War II when it was sunk. They resurrected this yacht, brought it back into nice shape just recently, added this nice string of lights. I'm looking at that, I'm like, kind of the same shape as the Horus and Sun Fountain in a way. Is there something with that shape? And I think there is. Although this is dedicated to Horus and Elder, the shape of it, I think is symbolic of the ancient Egyptian goddess Nuit and her husband Geb. Nuit, she's venerated as the sky itself, the barrier between order and chaos. And Geb, well, as the earth, or the mounds, or even the primordial mound. Remember, they describe this as the mound-like pool. Now, Nuit and Geb, they have 5 children in some cases. Isis, Osiris, Nephthys, Set. Anybody got a guess on their 5th child? Horus the Elder, of course. Of course it is. The sacred symbol of Nuit just happens to be the ladder to the heaven, used by Osiris to traverse the heavenly skies. Of course, Osiris can be linked to the constellation of Orion. It's actually the precise constellation that, symbolically speaking, the Horus and Sun Fountain occupies the middle belt star. Now, did Osamu Noguchi realize he was incorporating all these gods, all these goddesses into this one fountain? Or was this maybe a little unconscious? Well, I came across this quote that may describe exactly what Noguchi was doing. This is from Graham Hancock and Robert Bouval, Talismans, Secret Faith, Secret Cities. And they're kind of talking about the same thing in this book, sacred architecture. They're talking about Paris, France, over in Europe. Nothing to do with Detroit, but I think they describe what Noguchi did. What they say is there's numerous exhortations calling upon initiates to make copies on the earth of a region of the sky called the Duat. incorporating the constellation of Orion, associated with the god Osiris, and the star Sirius, associated with the goddess Isis. This was the sky region believed to be the location of the ancient Egyptian netherworld, where souls journeyed and were judged after death. It was therefore thought to be vitally important to gain foreknowledge of it and the trials that await the soul there. We learn from the book of what is in the Duat. One way to attain this gnosis was to build copies on the ground of the hidden circle of the Duat in the body of Nuit. That's perceivably exactly what Osama Noguchi did. He built a copy on the ground of the circle of the Duat in the body of Nuit, and then dedicated it to Horus the Elder and Horus the Sun. A lot of symbolism sitting here in the heart of Detroit, in the heart of Hart Plaza, in this one fountain alone. What I'd like to do now is go over some of the symbolism that followed Dodge automobiles. And we'll look at both Dodge and Chrysler because, in a way, they're part of the same family tree. So starting off with the original Dodge Brothers logo, it was a hexagram. Of course, a hexagram can take on a lot of different symbolic meanings. Steel of Solomon, Star of David, a Merkabah. We could go on and on. But as far as alchemy is concerned, the two triangles represent the reconciliation of fire and water. And here you see their two designs. Up top, they used fire. Below, they used water. I can't say for sure if Horace Dodge was interested in alchemy or not, but the symbolism kind of looks that way. The Dodge Ram. Well, this highly resembles the female reproductive system. I think we can think of a birthing process or a rebirthing process. Or it can also be considered, the Aries. Constellation of Aries, which is ruled by the planet Mars. And have a little fun now when you take the Dodge Viper and flip it over. It looks like Daffy Duck. This is just pure coincidence. Nobody meant to do this, I don't think. When I first figured this out, all I could think is Daffy Duck and Marvin the Martian. So I actually Googled Daffy Duck in space to see what popped up. He pops up wearing a Dodge Brothers symbol. I couldn't make this stuff up if I wanted to. Alright, a little more serious. The Chrysler wings, highly Egyptian stylized. And I think the symbol most of us are familiar with, the Chrysler symbol, is the original Chrysler symbol. And this was known as the Pentastar, designed back in the 1960s. But if you look close, you recognize they never completely finished the symbol. The tips of the stars are still open. Back in 2007, Chrysler's going through some revisions, and they revised their logo, and they close the star. They complete the symbol. And recall, this is, for the most part, the exact same symbolism that Augustus Woodward intended right from Detroit's inception. Was this symbol in some way destined for the streets of Detroit? We'll get back to it in a minute. Even Chrysler's headquarters, they're beaming this symbol right into space. Get ready for the next 100 years. And, they're topped by pyramids. I'll get back to that symbol momentarily here. But to conclude the correlation with the pyramids, the smallest pyramid in Giza, we have the actual pyramid in Hart Plaza. The signs point the way. Ancient Egyptian considered pyramids gateways to the stars, or I call that a Stargate. Or step pyramids like this were considered dwelling places of the gods, or connection points between the earthly realms and the heavenly realms. When you follow the causeway from the Horse and Sun Fountain to the pylon, it sits right at the entrance of Hart Plaza, and it's this giant 120-foot tall spiraling tower. And first thing I think is a transmitter and a receiver, especially it sits here at the entrance to Hart Plaza. And by the way, the entire plaza is done in red granite. The entire plaza is done in red granite. Lots of energy down here. And this is symbolic of space flight. According to Osama Noguchi in his own word, pylon is symbolic of space flight and all our aspirations that we have today. And as I mentioned, it's a companion piece, symbolic of our relationship to outer space. These artists really tell you what's going on in their own words. All you got to do is Google their name and a monument, and they'll tell you what's going on. So we're going to talk a bit about Osama Noguchi. Was this intentional or was this unconscious? Well, I mentioned last night, as far as intentionally, Noguchi had just returned from a 2-year sojourn around the world where he spent most of his time in India and in Egypt. He spent most of his time at the pyramids, really interested in the relationship the Egyptians had with their sacred landscapes in the heavens. Comes back to Detroit, the very first opportunity he gets to create a park or a plaza, he creates Heart Plaza. Plaza I'm proposing is aligned to the pyramids. That being said, I've done a lot of research and I've found nowhere where he comes out and says I laid out Heart Plaza to correlate to the pyramids. Oh, by the way, though, while he was designing Heart Plaza, he was reading a book called The Secrets of the Pyramids also. So this could have been intentional, but it could have been a little unconscious also. And the reason I say that is due to some of his previous works before he came down here. We're going to go back to 1947 again. In 1947, Sama Noguchi proposed to build what was going to be known as the face to be seen from Mars. This was going to be an enormous earthwork, a mile long, half-mile wide, have a pillar for a nose that was going to be a mile tall, but only be recognizable if viewed from space. The moon, or most likely, according to Noguchi, Mars. And what he intended is to inform extraterrestrials that before a nuclear destruction of our race, remember this is back in 1947, and we're messing around with nukes, that, well, a civilized life form once occupied the planet Earth. I'm not sure how civilized if he's worried about us blowing ourselves up with nukes. But incredible idea, incredible idea. And way before his time, this was the first proposed earthwork, or earth sculpture ever. Well, what makes this story really interesting, not only is this a good idea by Noguchi in 47, but around 30 years later, NASA sends back images from Mars of the Cydonia region, what appears to be a grouping of pyramids, and a face. They call this the face on Mars. 30 years later. When you put the face on Mars next to Noguchi's face to be seen from Mars, they're highly, highly similar, I believe. Highly similar. Could Noguchi have tapped into some sort of cosmic consciousness and brought this into fruition 30 years before NASA discovered it? I think it's a very good possibility. And recall, there's a lot going on in 1947. Errol Saarinen up here, he's proposing to build Heart Plaza. He's proposing a gateway arch. Noguchi's thinking about faces on Mars. And then later, Noguchi comes and actually builds Heart Plaza. So I'm going to just go over those one more time. 1947, all the divine revelations taking place. The Saarinens envision a civic center at the base of Woodward in Jefferson and Detroit. And around 30 years later, Noguchi comes to town and implements Saarinen's vision. Same year, 47. There used to be, it's called the Old Mariners Church. And it's actually located like a quarter-mile away now. Yep, they just moved it over. Yep, exactly. But it's always been a spiritual site. There's always been a church or something spiritual on that site. So same year, Saarinen imagines the Gateway Arch, and around 20 years later, it's brought into fruition. Same year, 1947, Noguchi's proposing to build the face to be seen from Mars. Around 30 years later, possible face on Mars is discovered. And of course, the Roswell incident is taking place in 1947, along with several other UFO incidents that are really starting to bring interstellar travel into the consciousness of humanity, all in this year, 1947. So what's going on? Well, I think these artists and architects were possibly tapping into some sort of cosmic consciousness. It's almost as if in the year 1947, the veil, so to speak, may have been a little thinner. And I think, although these monuments were imagined in 1947, they weren't brought into fruition until 20, 30 years later. And I think the symbolism's only starting to really be recognized right now. Right now, as if the time is right. Much of the symbolisms in these monuments has never been looked at or never been explored. You can't find a book on it anywhere. I've looked. So we looked briefly at what Noguchi did before he came to Heart Plaza. So what did he do when he left Heart Plaza? Well, he goes down to Cleveland, Ohio, and he creates this monument called the Portal. I mean, nothing really stunningly spectacular, but the name in and of itself, I think, says a lot. The Portal. From Ohio, he flies to Hawaii. He creates the Sky Gate. He says the Sky Gate, symbolic of a gateway to outer space, a gateway to the cosmos. I think Noguchi was truly a man of the cosmos, in contact with this cosmic consciousness. And he created a cosmic temple in downtown Detroit, of all places where I think we can go and connect with these exact same stellar energies that Osamu Noguchi once connected with, among other artists who've been down there, by the way. And that's what we're going to talk about next, some of the other monuments that emerged. Because all of this symbolism was back in the 70s. I call this the emergence of the gates, because in 2001, Detroit held their tricentennial birthday, and this is when all the gateway symbolism really came into play. These artists came down here, and they wanted to make companion pieces to go along with Osamu Noguchi's works. Wait till you see some of the stuff that they came up with. Well, first they got a new park just east of the Renaissance Center. The blueprints or the plans to the park were entitled the Gateway Vision. Back at Hart Plaza, once one of the last underground stops on the Underground Railroad. This is where slaves came before crossing the Detroit River to their freedom. And actually, the old Mariners Church I just talked about used to sit right here, and there was a tunnel that came out underground to the edge of the river. This was known as the Gateway to Freedom. Now, this sculpture, the Gateway to Freedom, it's done by the sculptor. His name is Ed Dwight. Just so happens Ed Dwight was our very first African-American astronaut, appointed personally by John F. Kennedy. It's truly a cosmic connection going on down here. Even the artists have a cosmic connection. He was the first African-American astronaut. Here you can see the conductor of the Underground Railroad. He points across the Detroit River to where there's slaves' freedom, and also the companion piece to this monument, the Tower of Freedom. And together, the Tower of Freedom and the Gateway to Freedom, they make up the National Memorial to the Underground Railroad. Then back between the Gateway to Freedom and the Horse and Sun Fountain sits this. Nothing special, but considering all the gateway symbolism down here, kind of highly resembles the Tower of Babel, gateway to the gods. Then they rededicated the Horse and Sun Fountain. We already looked at some of the out-of-this-world symbolism, but now they give it a plaque that reads, "This is an engine of water at the gateway to a great city," referring to Hart Plaza as a gateway. And then the focal point of Hart Plaza comes into play, the Transcending Gateway. Great gift. What a 300th birthday gift. This is done by a local artist by the name of David Barr. And, well, what I'd like to point out first is this goes along with the monument, and there's a green granite spiral that wraps around this monument and leads you through the center of the gateway. Now, the gateway itself, according to the artist, this is a giant gear. This is a UAW monument, United Auto Workers. So this is a giant gear protruding from the earth, and this is symbolic, the opening up here of the work that's yet to be done, or the labor yet to be done. Well, I see what David Barr is saying. It looks like a gear, but I think it looks like a Stargate, especially considering all the other symbolism down here. And he said in his own words he wanted to build a monument as a companion piece for Osamu Noguchi's work, something that just fit in. This is what he comes up with. A gear? Maybe. Well, I wrote David Barr and asked him, I know you say it's a gear, but did a Stargate ever cross your mind? I'm looking into unconscious symbolism. Did you even think of a Stargate when you were doing the plans and the blueprints for Transcending? David Barr says, no, Chad, never crossed my mind. But that being said, the green granite spiral that wraps around and leads you through this gateway allows you to leave the grid of the city for the sphere of space. Allows you to leave the grid of the city for the sphere of space. To me, he unconsciously described an urban portal, or a Stargate. I mean, I've been thinking how to describe it for a long time, and he, right off the bat, described it better than I could come up with. So that's how I like to describe these now. These urban portals allow you to leave the grid of the city for the sphere of space. And then, a week ago, I got a call from a friend, William Henry. He was out in Washington, D.C., and he was talking to an engineer by the name of Brooks Agnew. And he was showing this, and he showed Stargate Detroit and the Transcending Monument, said how David Barr thought it was a gear. And Brooks Agnew pulled him aside afterwards. He's like, that is a gear, but it's a certain kind of gear. It's called a synchronization ring. And what a synchronization ring does is it allows you to shift gears and to speed up. Well, that's starting to make a lot of sense. We got this synchronization ring that allows you to shift gears and speed up as you're traversing the spiral that allows you to leave the grid of the city for the sphere of space. That's what these artists are trying to tell us, pretty much in their own words. And I just want to point out, this is in Dallas. This is the Ring of Thanks. This is in Detroit, Transcending. Built 10 years apart. Artists don't know each other, as far as I can tell, but exact same symbolism. Even on the walls, they tell you what to do. spiral into the ring of thanks. Transcending, you spiral around the grid of the city for spirit space. Exact same symbolism showing up at these Stargate parks all over. And I think a lot of it's unconscious. The symbolism's working its way into the blueprints of these artists, I believe. Now, I want to talk a little bit about this stone here. Following the green granite spiral, you have these giant green Vermont boulder stones. And they all have bronze reliefs of the sacrifices and the achievements of the American workers. Well, this one in particular, which sits here, has this amazing relief of Dr. Martin Luther King on it. What's he doing down here under the Transcending Monument? Just so happens, this exact area is where Dr. Martin Luther King and hundreds of thousands of freedom fighters gathered previous to him delivering his I Have a Dream speech for the very first time, before he later delivered it in Washington. And the way this worked is these hundreds of thousands of freedom fighters, they gathered a little ways up Woodward Avenue. They marched down to the area that now occupies Hart Plaza. They gathered arm in arm. They start singing songs of freedom down there. Songs like We Shall Overcome, The Battle Hymn of the Republic. You get goosebumps just thinking about this. These guys are in a fight for freedom, a fight for their lives. And surely they're imbuing this landscape with some of these energies. I believe they were soaking up some of these previously deposited energies also. And the main reason I say that is how Dr. Martin Luther King decides to conclude his I Have a Dream speech in adjoining Cobo Hall. He marches into Cobo Hall, gives his amazing and uplifting speech. He concludes it in this amazing fashion. I have a dream this afternoon that the brotherhood of man will become a reality in this day. With this faith, I will go out and carve a tunnel of hope through the mountains of despair. With this faith, I will go out with you to transform bright yesterdays into bright tomorrows. With this faith, we'll be able to achieve this new day when all of God's children, black men, white men, Jews and Gentiles, Protestants and Catholics, will be able to join hands and sing with the Negroes and spirituals of old. Free at last, thank God Almighty, we are free at last. I just want to repeat that one phrase one more time. With this faith, I will go out and carve a tunnel of hope through the mountains of despair. With this faith, I will transform dark yesterdays into bright tomorrows. I think this is something we can all do in today's day and age by recognizing some of this symbolism down here and starting to transcend these gateways to freedom. And all of this symbolism so far is in this one little Hart Plaza. It's a cosmic temple. Now yesterday we didn't get to go anywhere past this. This is where we ended. Today we're going to take a 3-block journey to the north to its sister complex called Campus Martius. Martius is Latin for the field of Mars. I call this Campus Mars. Campus Mars is located right here at the base of Augustus Woodward's ancient pinnacle and Pentagon. Campus Mars, Detroit's local gathering spot, they call it. I just want to remind you some of the symbolism that was initially intended by Augustus Woodward, because it's going to come back into play as we make our journey to Campus Mars. So, first stop on the way is directly across from Hart Plaza, is this giant monument, a dedication to Joe Louis, a memorial to Joe Louis, and it's a 40 or 20-foot long arm and fist suspended on a cornerstone. It's right on the corner of Woodward and Jefferson, suspended by this triangular contraption. Get back to it in just a minute. Just across the road, in front of the Old Mariners Church we just talked about, is this beautiful sculpture of Freemasonic George Washington and his Freemasonic regalia. These two pieces were put here 15 years apart. Don't believe the artists knew each other once again. But what happens is when you stand in a certain area, when you look past Joe Louis, you see George standing behind him in the background. It gives you a very similar depiction, ancient paintings and depictions of George Washington laying the cornerstone to our Capitol. What I'd like to point out is this is on the corner of Woodward Avenue and Jefferson, hence Thomas Jefferson Augustus Woodward. Well, at this actual cornerstone ceremony, Thomas Jefferson was there, Augustus Woodward was there, Pierre L'Enfant, where these street plans originated, was there, and of course George Washington was there. So I call this the reunion of the Masons, and it sits right on the corner of Woodward and Jefferson in downtown Detroit. And once again, I think this was unconscious. Sorry. And Detroit has a real rich Freemasonic history. We have the largest Freemasonic temple in the entire world, the cornerstone to it. And I'm not going to get a lot into the Masons today, but one thing I would like to point out is somebody who came to visit the Masons years ago. Well, back in 1909, this is Aleister Crowley. Some people, his nickname is the Beast, the wickedest man alive. Other people, he's an occult hero. Relevance to our story today, in 1909, Crowley's in Egypt. He's doing invocations of the gods and the goddesses, happens to invoke the god Horus. Well, Horus gives Crowley this new download that he would later refer to as the New Law of Thelma, or the New Anna Horus, and he felt this was nothing less than the basis for a new spiritual epic. In regards to our story, 1919, Crowley decides the place to spread the New Anna Horus is Detroit, Michigan. So he comes to Detroit, makes his home base there, opens up a Universal bookstore, and he starts meeting with the local branches of Freemasons. Well, according to Detroit newspapers, meetings go poorly, and Crowley just leaves town unsuccessful. Well, maybe, but I'm not so sure. The talks did go well between Crowley and the Freemasons. Would they really went back to the Detroit Free Press and told them to let the public know we're about to issue in the New Anna Horus? Kinda doubt it. Kinda doubt it. Name of the game is hiding things in plain sight, so those who are aware can recognize it. So, what I need to point out, the highest deity in the New Anna Horus just happened to be the Egyptian goddess Nut. And here in downtown, we have the Horus and Sun fountain that I believe highly resembles Nut. Now, I can't say for sure, this is pure speculation, if this had anything to do with Crowley or not. I can't say, I'm just making a point. But if for some reason it did, understandably some may not be comfortable with this. And what I say to that is maybe it's not always who deposits the symbolism, but how we decide to view that symbolism and utilize that symbolism. What energy do we apply to it? There's a dark and a light to all of the symbolism. So just wanted to point that out, that's a possibility. It's a possibility. Now, still making our way to Campus Mars, right across from the Joe Louis Fist. This is the Spirit of Detroit, one of the oldest monuments down here, done by an artist by the name of Marshall Fredericks. Absolutely gorgeous. And behind the Spirit, it reads, "Now the Lord is that Spirit. Where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is liberty." And the large golden globe is symbolic of God or a higher deity. This is symbolic of family or the human relationship. Now, what I've noticed with these artists, all of these artists, they come to Detroit, they create these incredible and transformational pieces of art. But when they leave, they continue with the same type of transformational art, time and time again. And Fredericks was no exception. He went to Royal Oak and created Star Dreams, this couple ascending from the stars. I mean, just beautiful monuments. In this Washington, D.C., he created the expanding universe. This mythological being, he's got stars on his head. He's a star being. Funny story about the Spirit of Detroit. Back in 1982, St. Patrick's Day, Detroiters love their green beer. So St. Patrick's Day morning, they get up, and this naked ballerina statue sits directly across the road. You can actually see the transcending and the reflection. And well, local Detroiters get up, go get their green beer, and there's these giant green footprints leading across the road from the Spirit of Detroit to this naked ballerina statue over here. So that earned the Spirit of Detroit the new nickname, the Jolly Green Giant. And now we are arriving at Campus Mars, Detroit's point of origin, right here at the base of Woodward's ancient pinnacle and Pentagon. You can see this is the nice green growing park. You have a ziggurat with freedom atop of it. And this is a brand new CompuWare building. We'll start off by looking at the ziggurat with freedom atop. First thing I want to point out is you look down the street and you can see the pylon at Hart Plaza. A few years ago, this used to be located across the road, and they moved it over and they brought this park into perfect alignment with Hart Plaza. You can see a little bit better. She looks right down the road, and Freedom stands on top of that pyramid. So I'm thinking when Freedom's on top of that pyramid looking at Hart Plaza, she's probably contemplating transcending the gateways to freedom back at Hart Plaza. Why not? Oops. And here she is standing up top, and she's dressed in her spiritual suit of armor. She's got her helmet of salvation, her shield and breastplate of righteousness, her sword of God. She wears her sandals of peace. She stands on a star-studded pedestal. She looks down right below her, embedded in the concrete, right below this pyramid, is this giant blazing star pointing to the fact this is Detroit's point of origin. Anyone who's seen science fiction depictions of Stargates knows you got to have a point of origin to leave from and to return to. Here in Detroit, Campus Mars is Detroit's point of origin. This is where Augustus Woodward brought his tools and his instruments and laid out the streets of Detroit. In Detroit, you got 7 Mile, 8 Mile, well, 7 miles or 8 miles directly from this point. And something kind of unexpected happened. I did a tour down here a couple months ago, and when we got to the point of origin, everybody on the tour felt they had to stand on it and swear they can soak up the energy down here. I've been doing research down here for a long time and never contemplating standing on it. Every single person swore this is where you stand to soak up the energy down here. So it's a new experience to try if you make it down there. So the original street layouts of Augustus Woodward. Some of these roads have changed over the years due to traffic and whatnot, but the symbolism has reemerged back in 2003. Right here at the base of the Pentagon and Pinnacle, the CompuWare headquarters emerged. Exact same symbolism down here at Detroit's point of origin. As I mentioned, was this symbol destined for the streets in Detroit somehow? Briefly touching on Peter Champous's biomes, Michigan biomes, points out the Michigan biome takes on this shape, the Pentagon with the Pinnacle. I was contacted by a partner of his, Dr. John Sace, lately, and he mentioned to me, if you extend those lines of the Pentagon and Pinnacle, they align to sacred sites around the world. Machu Picchu, sacred mountains in China, Rennes Chateau, Mount Shasta. That's a pretty amazing scenario. Once again, was that symbol destined for the Michigan and the streets of Detroit? I mean, you can scale it in. Right here's Detroit. Zoom in. Bam, you're at Hart Plaza. Move up to Campus Mars, zoom in. You got the CompuWare building. I bet if you zoomed in down here in these cars, probably one of them has that hood ornament driving around the CompuWare building. So I'm thinking this symbol may have in some way been destined for the streets of Detroit. So what does the symbol mean? Well, with all symbols, they can take on a lot of different personifications, so we'll go through a couple of them. Here in the earthly realm, of course, the pentagram can be symbolic of the 5 elements: earth, air, water, fire, spirit, or space-time. It can also be symbolic of the body, our 4 limbs as well as our head, the human, the perfected man, or even the star man. Moving out to the reaches of the cosmos can be symbolic of the star system Sirius. Ancient Egyptians used the pentagram right in the Egyptian hieroglyph for Sirius, and Sirius can be represented by the Egyptian goddess Isis. Venus, every 5 conjunctions, inferior conjunctions in 8 years, Venus makes a pentagon in the sky when viewed from our point of origin, Earth. And recall, there's another pentagon that's a point of origin, and it's right back at Campus Mars. As above, so below. The pentagon can also be symbolic of Mars, considering the main and largest DNN pyramid on Mars is actually a pentagon. And of course, the god associated with Mars is Horus. Thinking Horus really has his eye on things down here in Stargate Detroit. And recall, back at Hart Plaza, Sama Noguchi, he was having possibly visions of Mars. Then you go 3 blocks to the north, and I think maybe these architects at Campus Mars might have been tapping into this consciousness too. It's a possibility. So which symbolism should we apply down there? I think we can apply all of it. I think all of the symbol was destined for Detroit. All this unconscious symbolism, this astrological and otherworldly symbolism, was most likely destined through the streets of Detroit. And what better way to get there than downloading these artists and architects with it? So, the question I had, and I hope somebody in here has, is what's underneath this giant glass pentagonal pyramid at Campus Mars, Detroit's point of origin? Well, you walk in there, and there's the largest hanging water feature in the world. And it's untitled, it has no name, So, to me, I'm thinking, with all the symbolism I've been looking at, to me this is symbolic of a rainbow bridge. Communications link between the earthly realms, heavenly realms, between humanity and the gods, between ourselves and our higher selves. This is the Norse Rainbow Bridge connecting Asgard to the earth. I mentioned last night, Iris, she's the rainbow goddess. But we can also think of the Rainbow Bridge as our chakra system. And these are places we can go to, I think, be a catalyst in helping us to activate our chakra systems. Alright, while we're on the subject of the Rainbow Bridge, we're in Washington, D.C. in the Capitol Dome now. I want to show you how some of this symbolism, once again, may have in some way emerged from Washington, D.C. And this is William Henry's work. He's been uncovering some of the symbolism. This is called the Apotheosis of George Washington. It's in our Capitol Dome, maybe the most important painting in American history. And what you see is you got George Washington, sorry this is a little blurry, riding a rainbow bridge in a heavenly scene. Liberty next to him, you got freedom below him, surrounded by a gate of 72 stars. And this symbolism is highly reminiscent of ancient Christian art. Jesus on the Rainbow Bridge, which is the equivalent to being in the Rainbow Ring. But what Constantini Bermidi did, the artist who did this is not a Christian scene. I'm not going to get into a lot of detail, but they're surrounded by pagan gods and goddesses. Not only that, he incorporated sacred geometry, in particular, the pentagon and the pentagram. Now, what's this got to do with back here in Detroit? Well, the same symbolism that was intentionally put into this painting in our Capitol Dome, I believe has unconsciously seeped its way into the art and architecture in downtown Detroit. And this is what I mean by that. Here in Detroit, at the base of Woodward's ancient pinnacle and pentagon, emerges a pentagonal-shaped building with a pentagonal-shaped pyramid, and underneath it is a symbolic representation of a rainbow bridge. Just out front and below is a giant sculpture of freedom on top of a star-studded pedestal. She looks down to the fact this is Detroit's point of origin. You move to Washington, same scenario. The Pentagon and Pinnacle, George Washington sits on a rainbow bridge. Just below Washington and the Rainbow Bridge is Freedom suited up in her spiritual suit of armor. Same scenario in Detroit, Freedom in her spiritual suit of armor. Here Freedom stands on a gate of 72 stars. Here Freedom stands on a star-studded gate. Freedom and George Washington look down below into the crypt. This is Washington, D.C.'s point of origin. This is Detroit's point of origin. Exact same symbolism that was intended in Washington, D.C., I believed unconsciously made its way into the street layouts, the art and architecture here in downtown Detroit. So, what is Detroit? I think this 3-block area between Hart Plaza and Campus Mars and the road lining it, we didn't even get to the buildings lining it. You got the Guardian building, some other incredible symbolism. I think this is all a cosmic temple, a place we can go and connect with stellar energies. And when we start to recognize this symbolism, I think we'll start seeing not only these parks, these monuments, but some of these cities, in particular Detroit, in a new light and from a new perspective. And I think that's a transformation we can all use, let alone Detroit. And when we start to follow the path, the Stargate trail, that these monuments and parks are leading us on, through synchronicities, coincidences, and even archetypes like Horace Dodge, this puts you on the path. This gives you the feeling that you're part of the cosmic flow of the universe. You're on the path of achieving cosmic consciousness, becoming a star being. And I believe that is the power of Stargate Detroit. So when we start seeing all this gateway and Stargate symbolism that's incorporated in some of these cities and some of these parks, but in particular Detroit, we need to start viewing them in a different light. These places, they deserve it. I mean, these are places we can go and connect. So, what do we make of it? Well, personally, I think it's time for us all to begin transcending these gateways to freedom. And just as Dr. Martin Luther King said, now is our time to begin carving the tunnels of hope through the mountains of despair. Now is our time to transform dark yesterdays into bright tomorrows. And I think we can all start by transcending these gateways to freedom and visiting some of these incredible Stargate parks so we can utilize some of these cosmic energies down here. Once again become, as Dr. Martin Luther King said, free at last. Cosmically speaking, free at last. Thank you, everybody. Really appreciate it. Does anybody have any questions? Yes, I've looked into quite detail into St. Louis and Chicago, and actually currently me and William are looking into all the cities of North America. But the ones that have really been investigated are St. Louis, Chicago, Nashville, and we got a friend in Philadelphia. But pretty much every city we look, we're finding one of these new parks. Yep, pretty much. Yep. Yeah, if anybody's interested, I got books and DVDs and some gear over here.